Thank you for joining the operations stage. As we previously saw, change is a constant, and equipping your frontline workforce is crucial. And with that in mind, I'm excited to introduce the founder of Future of Manufacturing, Robin Deschamps, to share with us his insights into leading through change and how to embrace the future of manufacturing. The floor is all yours, Robin.
Hi, Shala. Thank you very much for the introduction. I really like that you touched on change as a constant and not something that is maybe like only once. So good evening from Berlin here. It's already a little bit dark, but I'm very excited to be here. Thanks again also for the whole eCooper team for organizing this conference. It has been going, I think, the whole day. So kudos to all the people behind that. I know how stressful this can be. And yeah, my name is Robin. I want to take the next 20-25 minutes to talk about the future of manufacturing, the change basically that's coming, and to focus on one very specific aspect within this change. And it's one of my favorite topics, which are in the end the people and the humans, and probably one of the reasons why many of you are here at the conference. Let's just quickly wait until the slides are coming up. Yeah, perfect. Great. So quickly about myself. I studied industrial engineering and management, so kind of like a double degree, a little bit of engineering, a little bit of business. To all the engineers out there, I would not and I cannot call myself an engineer. I then spent 5 years investing in B2B startups in the software and marketplace space with Point9 Capital, mostly in Europe, but also North America. So spent quite some time in Boston and in San Francisco. And yeah, we've done early checks in B2B startups, mostly 1 to 3 million euros. So usually like the first investor. And with a big focus on manufacturing, and yeah, I think in early 2017, I kind of like discovered the trends and also like the hype about like Industry 4.0, how the Germans coined the term, and the whole, let's say, manufacturing industry. And last year, or at the end of last year, I quit my job to now fully focus on manufacturing in the future. I'm writing a newsletter that I call The Future of Manufacturing since 3 years, where I share some news about startups, some trends, with a few thousand subscribers now every month. And then I built a community on top of this just recently. And on top of this, with Avio, we're building an upskilling platform specifically for manufacturing companies, because we're convinced that talent and the skills are the number one reason why the industry is still where it is and not like much more advanced. So let's get into the topic on the next slide. I don't want to talk too much about COVID. I think we all are a bit tired of it, and luckily I think there's some good development in the States and also in Europe. But I think what's very interesting, and I think I heard some discussions today already here and there, that it has again underlined the importance of people who are working in the factory, who are working in the warehouse, who keep our factories and in the end also like our economy running. They are the ones who have helped to produce the masks, to produce the machines, to produce the vaccine, to help us ship the parcels that our Amazon package gets delivered on the next day. And as an example, also that you know, companies like Ford even produced face masks and face shields for the employees themselves. A second example on the next slide is, and I think again something that COVID underlined, is we're actually still far away from automation in manufacturing, and we're still far away from having very digital processes and that everything is just flowing digitally. And this is communication, this is processes between, let's say, machines and humans. These are all the different kind of systems and connectivity. We're still not there yet, at least manufacturers are not there yet. And even worse, I think, that the numbers of manufacturing companies that are saying they have successfully scaled some or many Industry 4.0 solution actually went down within the last 12 months by 40%, according to McKinsey. And so there's still a lot coming and a lot of work to be done. And the problem is, and what we also see on the next slide, the problem is that digital manufacturing means building a digital workforce, but it comes with the challenges. And I think just read actually today an article, and I guess it's important for the people from the US here, that the so-called skills gap, which means the mismatch between the skills needed by employers and those the labor force has, is widening again and again. And today this article, which is actually focused on the US, said it's a problem that's probably up to $1 trillion until 2030, I think. Meaning that there's a lot of, or like a big loss of GDP coming in the next few years because many roles are unfilled. And there's two main trends, I would say, that make this problem even bigger. On the one hand, it's a talent scarcity. So experienced people leaving, especially in Germany, we call it Fachkräftemangel, where people who have worked for 20, 30 years now leave the company and all the knowledge is gone. And a second, I think that's even more probably crucial in the US, it's a very competitive labor market. Amazon, for example, now increases the wage to, I think, like $15 per hour as a minimum wage. It's hard to compete on this. And on the other hand, and I think this makes the skills get even worse, and also like, especially in like the mid-management and other roles, like new technologies. The introduction of new technologies such as artificial intelligence, IoT, 3D printing, robotics. And if we think about the future, like the talent scarcity doesn't really get much better. New technologies, this will, I think, only increase. And so the summary, or like the skills gap as a whole, will probably get worse. And on the next slide, that's bad news again to the problem. The problem would only get bigger. And sometimes when I have conversation with people who manage a factory and we'll talk about the digital transformation, I think there's something which I don't quite understand, or sometimes I think a misinterpretation. There is not one transformation. I think now, especially in Germany, companies, they talk a lot about, yeah, we have to do this digital transformation. There's this, digital transformation officer. She is responsible now for this, and we just have to get digitalized. And while this is true, of course, I think what's wrong with this approach is that it's a single transformation. And I think it's no coincidence that other companies already, in the bigger ones especially, talk about lifelong learning, about basically transformation. They have to transform their company every year and just get better and better because it won't stop. And the technologies and everything just moves faster and faster and also won't stop. And so what we're seeing actually, and I think this is very interesting, and I have a few examples here, is that the leading manufacturing companies, the very big companies, they feel the pain already today. So they invest heavily in building a digital workforce. They spend a lot of money on this. They have very different initiatives to kind of solve this problem. And I think none of them actually has solved it today, but at least they're aware of it and they're investing a lot of money. And we'll have, for example, Bosch. And it's actually quite interesting because all the three, like Bosch, Siemens, and Volkswagen, you can go into the annual report. You can actually see how they talk about the skills gap and about the labor shortage, and also like what they do. And the interesting thing, I think, is that that's quite different how the company approaches it. For example, Bosch is very verbal about the problem. They call themselves like a learning company. Here you have the quote from the CEO who says either learning or staying analog. And they spend 250 million per year on learning and development. And this is like I think where this money flows is very different, right? From like an internal academy to, let's say, seminars for leaderships, to continuous improvement initiatives on the shop floor, to then a digital platform where people can consume videos. So it's all kind of like different initiatives. And Siemens also, not too recently, announced that they invest 100 million additionally on learning and development into like digital upskilling. And then I think probably the most interesting case is Volkswagen. I mean, it's a massive company. Maybe we have even people here in the audience who work there. But what's really interesting, I think, is with Volkswagen. So due to electromobility, of course, there's certain skills, certain types of workers, they don't need it much anymore in the next 2 years. And on the other hand, and they're very vocal about this as well, they need 10,000 additional software developers until 2025. So in the next 4 years, basically. And it's impossible to hire them externally. And so what they do now, they've built here in Wolfsburg, and not too far away from Berlin, they've built their own campus, which they call Faculty 73, to train software developers. So how it works is basically they have their own campus. They have roughly 100 spots, mostly for internal employees who basically get reskilled to become a software developer. And on top of this, they're partnering with other education providers, such as École 42, which is also training software developers. So I think what we're seeing here is they've understood the problem, they are seeing the pain, they're doing something here and there. Yet, I would say it's very challenging because they still haven't somehow cracked the code or solved the problem. And I think what's interesting, again, like with the language, how the big companies talk about this, they're very aware already that people are the most important resource. I have the quote here from Lawrence Bossidy, who is the former COO of GE, who basically said, "I'm convinced that nothing we do is more important than hiring and developing people." And I think, especially now the latter part with the world is moving faster and like the whole development is going on, developing people becomes more important. And at the end of the day, as he mentions, you bet on people, not on strategy. And I think that's also like one of the reasons why we're all here for. And if you talk to, let's say, more like medium-sized businesses, like smaller companies, and I had a lot of these conversations in Germany, we have this, what we call Mittelstand, like very successful companies, more mid-sized companies that produce certain parts, usually have a very significant market share. And I think it was interesting that in the last decades, they have been very successful, very profitable. They made a lot of money. And how they grew often was by investing more into machines or investing more into like technology, maybe outsourcing even something, increasing efficiency. And so I think there's still like a mindset where they're mostly into like, hey, we have to invest in machines to grow. But I think now what's changing, and I think we saw this just like with the recent examples, what the big companies doing, that you have to go from like investing into machines to investing more into people. And so human resources for some companies, unfortunately, is still more like an admin function, which is responsible maybe for payroll. But the way I see it, and I think there's definitely people who agree, is that human resources and like how you think about the workforce should be a strategic priority. So think about, what capabilities do you have today? What other skills do you have today in your workforce? What is actually needed in the next 5 years? What is needed in the next 10 years? And then how can I get there? And most of these companies, especially the smaller one, I think they struggle to hire the very best people. I mean, it's crazy hard, of course, if you want to compete with, I don't know, like Apple or Volkswagen or BMW. But they have a very, very smart and very good workforce who, knows the culture, who knows the processes. So I think the only way kind of actually to survive is you take this workforce you have today and try to up-level them and try basically to give them the skills needed also for your future and for their future. And so I think enabling people is not only a priority in the end for HR, for human resources, but across the board. And I think what's ironic sometimes is that it's not something new. I mean, many probably, if you work in manufacturing, I'm sure you're familiar with lean manufacturing that got invented by Toyota. And lean management, it's kind of like philosophy that many companies now adopted in the last years and last decade even, especially in automotive, for example. And it focuses again on the human part, which basically means, hey, the people who are working on the process, they have the most knowledge. So give them this responsibility, let them also take action, let them discover things, and then try to make the process better and continuously improve the processes. And to quote Toyota on this, how they see it is like, when everyone works together and each person can see the contribution to the whole, the system benefits. And I think the system can, for example, mean the whole factory. And I think, again, it underlines how important basically the human, the frontline worker, and the people are. And then the second example on the next slide, it's a more recent example from Audi. And again, I think it's an interesting example because we are maybe today, if you will, let's say, work in business or even in a startup or so, I mean, we can work from home all the time. We can work remotely if we want. I'm here in Berlin. I'm talking to many people here who are somewhere else. But if you work as a shift in like a factory, it's super hard, right? Like it's super hard to have flexibility. It's super hard. Tomorrow I need to go to the doctor with my baby. It's not easy. And so what Audi did actually, they wanted to improve the agility within their shifts. And so they kind of like did co-creation workshops together with the humans who work there, together with the frontline workers in the end. And I think what's interesting, some companies have maybe tried it like more top down, where one or two people decide, what's maybe the best format to do the shift planning. And Audi basically has swapped it and said, hey, let's create this bottom up. Let's take the people, let's bring them together again to workshop, let them brainstorm, let them think about ideas, because in the end, they are doing the job. And then, let's create maybe like a shift plan for all these people that fits more to their schedule and their needs. And so the quote that I translated from German from one of the people who led the project was, 15 workers, so 15 frontline workers, have done an incredible job at what is a massive challenge for professional change managers. And so I think it was clearly, again, visible how successful it is if you involve the people, if you let them decide and give them more responsibility. And I think when I have discussions about the future of manufacturing, about Industry 4.0, and if you look at the media, what's written there, there's often, I think, these headlines where, robots will automate all the jobs and humans get replaced by robots and machines, and maybe people, have in mind how an assembly line in an automotive factory works because there's lots of robots. And while all of this is true, I think actually the technology is an enabler, and is also an enabler for people. People can do better jobs. People can be more productive. They might not have to lift very heavy things because they can wear like an exoskeleton. They can maybe communicate easier or better because they have communication apps where they can communicate together with colleagues or maybe somewhere else in the factory. And so I think it's not technology or machines or robots versus human, but I think more actually it's a combination. And how can you make both of it better? And I think also we have to put an effort into helping people to understand the benefits of technology, because often I think people are afraid, and I think it's also a bit due to the media, that technology will steal their job, robots will steal their job. But in the end, so far we haven't seen it. In the report I mentioned today from Deloitte, where it's about the skills gap and the $1 trillion problem, it also says again, like, robots play no significant role when it comes to, for example, replacing humans so far. And so I think it's more like an enabler than any other thing. And if we go into the next slide, so that's like a landscape I created in winter 2018 and early 2018, where I basically went through like all the startups and manufacturing I saw. I tried to cluster them in like different brackets, from, let's say, simulation tools, prototyping, to analytic software, to IoT, and to shop floor apps and app platforms. And there's quite a lot of it already in 2018. And I don't say it's complete, but I think it gives you a good picture of, what was out there, and it's publicly available, so you can look it up if you want. And then if you go to the next slide, and this was 3 years, so that's 3 years later, it's probably hard to see any logo now. And within these 3 years, I think back then there were like 90 to 100 companies. Now there's like close to 500 companies. And what I mean by companies, like startups within the manufacturing landscape. And I think if you work in a big company, sometimes you go into this like tunnel and you don't really see what's left and right. And I think the slide shows you a little bit actually what happened within these 3 years, which I think is quite magical. And yes, there's 500 companies and startups. Some of them will fail as usually, but some will not, and probably some will become very, very big. And I think it's again this classic innovator's dilemma, where you maybe don't see the change as fast as it is today, but then if you look back, for example, here 3 years ago, there was a lot of change. And this change won't slow down, right? It will only increase. And there will be new players who go into IoT. There will be new players who go into building software for analytics. So I think it's super important to think about, how can you be disrupted? How does your business model change? How do you see the future? What are the skills you need in the future? And how can you get there? And again, I think this is it's again back to the humans, right? Because you have to think about all the processes you have in place. How can you improve them? And also, and maybe that's also an interesting anecdote here, I talked to one US founder of one of these startups who's selling in Germany. And he was making this, it's not a joke, actually, it's reality, but it's half joke, half reality. It's like, Robin, if I have to sell in Germany, the only thing I have to do is rejection management. I'm like, why? Yeah, people in Germany, they either say it doesn't work or they say they can do it themselves. And what I want to say with this is, like, it's a bit typical for Germans, but there's a lot of solutions out there already. And I think, before you, for example, put a lot of effort, money, and time into building your own solution, maybe it makes sense to look outside for a solution. And I think Beekeeper is a good example, right? Why would you build your own communication solution for the shop floor or for your frontline workers if there's already good solutions out there? And if you go to the next slide, here in the down right, we already have like some of these, let's say, shop floor workflow apps and app platforms that are out there already. And again, there's many more. So how I think about the future of manufacturing, and I think in the end, it will be driven by people. So to me, there's like three most important aspects, and when it comes to like what actually will be driven by people. I think on the one hand, and it's something I try to cover a little bit in the talk, it's about like empowerment really bottom up. If you work in tech, people are usually very empowered, and it doesn't matter which role you have in this company. There's a lot of like freedom, responsibility, people trust each other. I think manufacturing is still an industry that is very much managed top down and not bottom up. And again, I think the interesting thing is that, the workers are in the end the closest people to the business, to the process on the shop floor. They can recognize problems, they can recognize opportunities maybe even faster. So I think if you don't recognize this, you leave a lot of like wins out there. The second one is like, it's a lot about, I think, productivity improvements, and due to rising wages in countries such as like China and in general in Asia, it gets harder and harder just, to increase efficiency or productivity by outsourcing. And so I think you have to be very smart how you think about, your own factory, your own process in the future. And I think where you can probably get some help from, or what can help for sure, is probably upgrading workers with digital tools to increase productivity. This can be in communication. This can be actually how you repair machines. This can be how you think about predictive maintenance, how you, for example, connect machines to the worker. And then the third part, and of course, that's something that's very important to me, and I think it's a big problem for the economy, it's a big problem for the companies and for our society in general. It's the upskilling and the continuous transformation part. So again, I don't think there's like only one transformation. It won't stop, the digitalization won't stop, new technologies won't stop. It just will probably be faster and faster. And so companies need to continuously try to reinvent themselves. And I think if you cannot hire talent from external, then I would put a lot of effort into how can I actually train my talent. And it's not only about like training and giving people the skills, but also like helping people actually to understand why this is needed. In the end, I think, people develop themselves the best if they have intrinsic motivation. And so it's a fine line and a balance, but you need to carefully think about how can the incentive structure actually fit well together from both the employer and the employee. And to round all of this up, I want to say that there's no time to wait. And why I underline this is that in lots of discussions I had in the last 3 years, there's often the question, it's really not important today. I totally agree with what you're saying. I totally agree with it. I see it similar, but not right now. Yeah? Maybe we'll do this like in 1 or 2 years, but maybe right now it's not a great time. We need to first, connect our machines to something different. Fair, but the longer you wait, the worse it will get. That's for sure, right? The problem won't heal itself. And I think what's even more important is that even if you don't do like a big project, whatever it is, like doing also small steps helps a lot. And it also helps if it fails, because in the end, it speeds up the learning. It speeds up the learning cycle of your employees, the learning cycle of your companies. And companies that try hard and that try a lot, they learn much, much faster. And I think for some German automotive companies now, they maybe might regret a little bit that they haven't done more in electromobility in the last 2 years. I don't want to compare always Tesla versus, like Daimler or Volkswagen, but Tesla tried a lot, right? And they learned a lot. They learned a lot about batteries. They learned a lot about autonomous driving. They learned a lot about like how do you combine software and hardware in like a car. And it's crazy hard to catch up. Once you're a bit more far away, you maybe have a little bit of advantage in hiring people. So I'm here in Berlin, and there's 1 hour away here. They're building a Tesla factory where I heard there's quite some interest of people who want to work there, even though there's, I think, many other interesting employers in the automotive world in Germany. And so the important piece here really is like, don't wait, start, and definitely speed up your learning cycle, because otherwise this might kill you slowly if you wait too long. And with this, I want to say thank you very much. I think we have a few more minutes in case there are any questions. You can reach me at robin@aveo.one or check out our first course we did on Aveo and also my work on the future of manufacturing. And yeah, thanks again for having me.
Wonderful. Thank you, Robin. Vielen Dank. We do have a few questions. The first one is, what role does communication play on the shop floor, and why do you think it's so important?
Yeah, I think the interesting piece with the communication on the shop floor is, if you think about a shop floor, it's usually very distributed. People are at different places, machines are at different places. So if I'm here in an office and I have, my 10 coworkers here, I can probably easily communicate in, let's say, an analog way. But if you think about a factory, and also if you think about like shifts in factories, a lot of information gets lost, right? And then, something happened and the worker goes away and the new one joins, but she doesn't know what actually happened. And so that's why I think actually communication plays a really big role. It gets even more interesting if you think about connecting the machines to the humans somehow. So there's again communication between different, like the whole system, let's say. And I think the last part, which is also interesting here, is that there's a record of communication at some point, right? If you can do it digitally. So let's say you had a problem and maybe there was kind of like a unique problem with machine X, but it was half a year ago. You probably, it's hard to find any documents, any documentation about this. Let's say you have somehow talked about it in a digital way. You usually will find the information somehow, similar probably like in Slack, right? You can just like type in Google something. And I think people still underestimate actually the communication and the effort that the benefits can bring once you kind of like integrate all different, let's say, parts or objects like in the factory together in one system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really interesting. Another question, you're mentioning the skills gap. Where do you see that biggest gap?
Yeah, I love this question. And the reason why I love it is if you talk to people and like very high up the hierarchy, like leaders or C-level people, and they often mention, yeah, we have a skills gap. And then if you ask them, yeah, what exactly is the gap? Yeah, IT, yeah, and so on. And the reason I think why this is the case is, first of all, it's crazy hard to measure the skills. Right? Like it's about people, and people have very different skills. There's no clear taxonomy, there's no standardization, so it's super hard to measure the skills. It's also really hard to think about what are the skills you need in 5 years. But if I want to, or if I should give like a precise answer, I think on the one hand, it's definitely in IT. I think the Volkswagen example is interesting because they are very open. They say, look, we need 10,000 software developers in the next 4 years. It's a crazy big number. I think in the US, for example, there's a big skills gap when it comes to welding. To be honest, I don't really understand why, but I just read again today in the article and in the study. And then I think that maybe one last anecdote that I thought was interesting. When I talked to the people from the faculty 73 from Volkswagen, and I asked them actually, what do you think is the most important skill for, let's say, the future manufacturing? And he mentioned creativity. And creativity in a way, because first of all, everything is so optimized. And we need people who take the time to creatively think about new solutions for current problems. But today it's all about, just getting a little bit better here and there and trying to optimize and maybe trying to increase output by 1% or efficiency. But we actually need really people who are very creative problem solvers, maybe like Elon Musk a little bit. But I thought it was an interesting answer.
Yeah, that is interesting. Last question I have for you. Do you think factories will get automated very soon? And what role will humans play in the upcoming years?
Yeah, I have a very strong opinion that it's not the case at all in the next few years. And there will be an increase of automation, for sure. But this will probably, lead to like new jobs, to different tasks that humans will do. And again, I think there's a lot of like exception handling, especially in the discrete manufacturing, for example, where I think the humans will still play a very crucial role. I like the way to think about this creative problem solver, because there will be always problems, and I think it won't stop. And so my sense is that in the end, technology is more like an enabler. It enables maybe us to produce faster, to maybe even hopefully produce more again in the US and in Europe, and not and reshore basically our factories. And I think we see this a little bit here and there. But I'm not a big believer in complete, let's say, autonomous factories. The only exception I would say is like, if you would build a factory today from scratch, then probably you can automate already a lot. But I would say like 99% of the factories, they exist already for 5, 10, or probably like 50 years. And so it there is this like legacy system, there is like this, everything is already set up, and so it's crazy how just to automate this from today to tomorrow.
Okay, Light, there was one more question that just came in.
Yes.
How do you help motivate top management for these types of changes?
Wow, this is a very good question. Because I think, so the way how we usually approach this when we talk to people, it's really interesting because there's a big variety of people we come across it, and a big variety in terms of like motivation for the topic in themselves. I think some people, like Bosch, the example, right? They've completely understood it. They're very open about it. They talk about it. And then what I mentioned with the more, let's say, SMB companies, there's people who still think, it's more investing into machines and investing maybe in technology and not in people. And the way how we usually do it is what helps. It's just underlining how big the problem is already today, underlining the market pressure and underlining the trends, and actually like basically taking them with us and explaining how big this problem is already today and will become in the next few years, especially if they don't do something and stay as they are. I mean, if I would have a silver bullet, I would love to hear it from somebody else. Incentivation and motivation is a big thing here, but that's at least how we try to do it. Like size of the problem, market trends, and then also like some examples of what's already done today, right? With like Volkswagen and Bosch, what I mentioned.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful.
Because then people see it's possible, right? I think a lot of this in this industry, people think, it's not possible, maybe not now, there's no urgency, but you somehow have to create this urgency. Then probably people will understand it better.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Robin. That was
Thank
great.
you.
Yeah, we do have to cut it off there. But as I mentioned before, if we weren't able to get to your questions, please don't worry. We will follow up with you directly. And that wraps up our operations track for Frontline Future. So I wanted to say thank you for joining me today. Thank you also to everybody that was a speaker in this session. And I'm excited to see you all over the main stage as we hear from Crystal around the topic of how to